So you hand in your work or you step off that stage, and then the praise begins. They tell you it's brilliant. But inside, something else happens. Your stomach just drops. You feel like a complete scam artist, and you're just waiting for the world to find you out. So let's start right there. Let's really examine that feeling, that cold, persistent dread that just seems to live right under the surface of all your success. Yeah, this is really the heart of it all. See, while everyone else is looking at your accomplishments, all you can see is the gap, the space between what you actually produced and that perfect, flawless version that existed in your mind. And so the applause, it just sounds hollow, doesn't it? Because you are convinced you've just pulled off some massive deception. You know, for years, the advice has been the same. Just be more confident. Stop being so hard on yourself. But that advice always fails. It never works. And the reason is, the source of this feeling isn't low self-esteem. It's not weakness. It's actually coming from a place of intense, almost painful awareness. You're holding yourself to these internal benchmarks that nobody else can even see. And that leads us to this kind of cruel paradox of a high-functioning mind. What if this feeling isn't a flaw at all? What if it's actually a feature, a psychological marker of an exceptionally gifted intellect? Psychologists actually have a name for this. They call it the imposter phenomenon. And while sure, it affects a lot of people, it runs remarkably deep in gifted individuals. The paradox behind it is devastatingly simple. The higher your own internal standard becomes, the more convinced you are that you've completely failed to meet it. And this is where the contrast is just stark. Average minds, they often don't suffer from this. In fact, sometimes having limited knowledge can lead people to dramatically overestimate their own ability. But the gifted mind, well, it experiences the exact opposite. The deeper you go into a subject, the more painfully aware you become of the vast, endless complexity that still remains. And this is such a crucial point. When you look at a really complex problem and you say the words, "I don't know," that's not a moment of weakness. Not at all. It's actually a sign of incredible intellectual rigor. It's a statement of clinical precision coming from a mind that actually understands the true scope of the unknown. So the big question is, why? Why does this happen? Well, the answer really lies in the very mechanics of your mind. It turns out you are, almost entirely by design, your own harshest critic. Research consistently links this whole phenomenon to something called high metacognitive ability. What does that mean? It means your brain has this fierce, almost uncomfortable skill in auditing its own thinking. You have this constant, almost painful awareness of every single one of your own imperfections. I mean, just think about the implication of that for a second. That feeling of being a fraud, it isn't insecurity. It's the natural byproduct of a mind that is just ruthlessly effective at self-evaluation. It's a design feature, not a bug. But this design feature has a really crippling side effect. Because you can so vividly imagine the perfect outcome, the actual act of creating it in our messy, imperfect reality, it always feels like a compromise. So you overthink, you hesitate, you end up paralyzed, not by a lack of ability, but by the sheer friction of trying to force a flawless mental model out into the real world. And this is where the entire narrative pivots. We've defined the problem, we've analyzed the cause, but now we're going to reframe it completely. What if everything you've come to hate about this feeling, what if it's secretly your greatest source of strength? So get this. Organizational psychologists, they went and studied professionals in these really high-stakes fields, people who reported having these exact imposter thoughts. And the results, they were just shocking. The individuals experiencing all this self-doubt didn't perform worse. No, in many cases, they actually performed significantly better. And the reason why is actually pretty simple. Because they felt like they might not know everything, they showed up sharper, they listened way more carefully, they collaborated with more empathy, and they stayed so much more open to growth. That feeling of being a fraud, it literally compelled them to outperform their peers. Which leads us to this incredibly effective, even lucrative mental state. This is the place where this feeling stops being a liability and it becomes your greatest asset. The goal here is to cultivate something called confident humility. This is the balance, right? It's where you're confident enough to move forward and actually take action, but you're still humble enough to constantly revise your thinking when new information shows up. I mean, think about it. The most dangerous people in any room, they're not the ones who feel unsure. They're the ones who are completely 100% certain. Because certainty, it just shuts down curiosity. But your calibrated doubt, well, that's a tool. It's what keeps you gathering data, refining your skills, and consistently outperforming all those people who are just coasting on blind arrogance. So where does that leave us? What's the final takeaway? How do you actually transform this internal friction from something that paralyzes you into a real source of power? Look, the key is not to try and eliminate your self-doubts. That's not the goal. The goal is to stop it from paralyzing you. You have to learn to separate that flawless ideal in your head from the imperfect but absolutely necessary action that actually builds success in the real world. Let me be perfectly clear. Your mind is not broken. You are not a fake. You simply process reality with a level of depth, a level of pattern recognition, and a kind of precision that most people will just never comprehend. So stop apologizing for your impossible standards. So this is the final command. That feeling, it's probably never going to disappear completely because it's part of what makes you who you are. So, trust your depth and execute anyway.